Shedeur Sanders revealed what he thinks is his number one attribute as a quarterback, and it may just be enough to convince the Browns to draft him. We'll talk about that and more coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Shedeur Sanders has met with the Browns, revealed what he thinks his number one attribute is, and it sounded awfully familiar. If the Browns are going to trade back, I see two teams that could be fleeced in the process and get the picks that the Browns are looking for. And are we talking enough about this need for the Cleveland Browns? I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen each and every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet $5. You'll get $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Shedeur Sanders at the East-West Shrine Bowl has spoken to the media. He's had a lot of different things to say. He is not actually participating in the game anymore, which it sounds like that was off of the recommendation from the top three teams in the draft, or that are considering potentially drafting him. The Titans, the Browns, and the Giants all seem to sort of convince him not to participate in practice this week. But he did go through some throwing drills, and it sounds like he has met with the Browns from some of the reporting that's been out there. I think ESPN had that first. But what I also found interesting was he did a media session where he was, peppered with questions by reporters. And one of the things that was asked of him was what he thinks his number one attribute is. And what was his answer was pretty telling. And I think it sort of it helps connect the dots between the Browns and potentially their interest in Shedeur Sanders, because he flat out basically laid out this whole reasoning why his decision-making is the thing that he thinks he does the best. His ability to, not panic, scan the field, make the right reads, make the right throws, and put his team in position to be successful because he is a sound decision maker. And it echoed what we played on the podcast last week, and I'll play for you again here. The comments made from Tommy Rees last week during his introductory press conference. Here's what he had to say again, if you forgot.
Yeah, at the end of the day, a quarterback's job is to solve problems. You're going to be tasked 60, 70, 80 times a game to make a decision in a critical moment. And so I've always started with the ability to make quick decisions and make the right decisions. So if you said one thing over the other, I want a decision maker at that point.
So that is the irony, I should say. Not even the irony, but more so just like the coincidence of Tommy Rees saying that on Thursday, and then 2 days later, you get Shedeur Sanders essentially saying the same thing to a scrum of media that, like, this is the thing that I think I do better than anybody in this draft class and why I'm a good quarterback. I thought it was pretty telling. And it does lean into the idea, which I've said from the start, that I think Shedeur Sanders probably is the better fit for the Browns and what they want to do on offense in terms of running Kevin Stefanski's system. You need somebody who can make those plays. They tend to make the reads pretty easy with a lot of different boot plays and the layers to the scheme and what the receivers are doing. And they try to make the quarterback's job as easy as possible. And if you have somebody who is a sound decision maker, somebody that you trust to make those the right play, especially on the heels of a quarterback in Deshaun Watson, that clearly at this point in his career, after everything he's been through, that has kind of eluded him. It's evaded him. He no longer is that great reading a defense, make the right throws downfield type player, and he takes too long to process. And so if the Browns are looking for that in their quarterback, Shedeur basically just laid out why he thinks he's the guy for that. I did think it was, again, interesting that those two comments were made a couple days apart. And obviously that's just Tommy Rees's commentary, but I think it's, when you get the offensive coordinator saying this is the thing that I think is the most important thing for a quarterback to have, and then a quarterback saying this is the thing that I do best, it's at least going to intrigue everybody into whether or not they are interested in this player and whether or not it's a fit between that player and this team. Now, there were some other things that came out over the weekend. One of them being that, Shedeur has apparently met with the Browns already. And I think that's telling because there was no like follow up to that with the reporting. There was no like, oh, he met with the Browns and he's made it clear he doesn't want to go. And maybe that happens, but we haven't been told that. And so I think that's interesting because what's the conversation been around Shedeur? Are he and his dad going to be willing to come play in Cleveland? Like, is that something that is acceptable to them as they try to find the most advantageous situation to making sure Shedeur has a successful career at the next level? They have not yet nixed the Browns, and the fact that he met with them is I guess a promising thing. Now the other part of that is Shedeur was kind of seen joking around with one of his Colorado teammates, Will Shepard, one of his wide receivers, about the fact that Will kind of busted his chops about this idea of, well, hey, I hear you're going to be a Cleveland Brown. And this was on, I think Bleacher Report shared this, but it was interesting because Shedeur's reaction was kind of like he went dead silent, almost like, man, like, and then he basically said, like, I don't know where I'm going to end up. I'm just going to be grateful to whoever drafts me. So maybe a different stance than what we've heard in terms of him nixing certain teams or saying he's not going to go certain places. And maybe that is still to come. We don't know. But as things stand right now, it doesn't seem like the door is closed on the Browns being the potential destination for Shedeur Sanders if they deem it fit. And based on what he's saying about what his top skill set is, I just think it's funny and it's fitting that the team has kind of put an emphasis, at least Tommy Rees put an emphasis on that being the trait that they're looking for in their next signal caller. Now, that doesn't necessarily just, make it a foregone conclusion that that's going to be the pick and that that's what's going to happen. The Browns have to go through the process here, make a decision on whether or not they think a quarterback is worth taking in this draft. And that's the biggest thing here. Like, just because Shedeur Sanders, ironically, 2 days after Tommy Rees says he thinks that the number one trait his quarterback needs to have, and 2 days later, you got Shedeur saying that's the thing that he also does well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the pick for Cleveland, obviously. And there still are a lot of doubts, as I've made clear on this very podcast, about whether or not the Browns should go quarterback in this class. I put a lot of stock in Dane Brugler of The Athletic, saying that he thinks the two quarterbacks at the top of this class, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, would be like 7 or 8 in last year's class. I find sort of interesting. And that sort of tells me like everyone's looking for the next Jaden Daniels. I don't know if that guy exists in this class. And so it still is a dilemma. It's still something that they have to sort through and decide whether or not it's worth taking a quarterback here. But it was just another sort of tea leaf, if you will, pointing towards if the Browns are going to go quarterback, Shedeur Sanders feels like he is the right fit. Like, he is the guy that the Browns should be sort of emphasizing trying to get, because what he does is what best suits the Browns offense, or at least what the Browns offense wants to do and is trying to get back to doing under Kevin Stefanski and now new offensive coordinator Tommy Rees. Speaking of the draft and speaking of whether or not they should take a quarterback, I've thought about, as I laid out last week, why I think trading back makes the most sense for this team. I also sort of started forecasting which teams make the most sense to trade with. That is where I want to talk about coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. A small business owner, you don't want to, your work doesn't end when you clock out at 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn Jobs clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job at LinkedIn's new feature that can help you write descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find a high quality hire. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions may apply. All right, so I talked last week heavily about the idea that the Browns probably should trade back in this draft, and that it just makes the most sense from a logistical standpoint of where they're at, where they're picking, who's available to them. And while I'm not necessarily sold on taking either of these quarterbacks as a franchise savior, which if you're drafting a quarterback at 2, that's what you need to be able to land. And the 2 teams that stand out to me that I think, fleeced I think kind of has a negative connotation to it for the opposing fan bases, and maybe that would play out here. I don't know. But the idea that I think like the teams that I think the Browns can take the most advantage of, and what I mean by that is like get the biggest haul from. The first one that comes to mind is the team directly behind them in the New York Giants. The New York Giants are in a situation right now where I understand there's a lot of pressure on Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski to obviously go out and win next season, have a successful season, steady the waters, get people off their backs, if you will, in terms of feeling like it's a sinking ship and that you can't trust this regime anymore. So there's a lot, there's certainly a lot of pressure on their end of things to get this thing figured out. I can be sympathetic towards that. I can respect that. But I think that the Giants have one of the most volatile situations going into next year of any team in the NFL. They need to win now. Brian Dable, fans were clamoring for him to get fired with airplane banners being flown behind the airplanes in the sky on game days. Like, they want him gone. And so he needs to 100% have a good season next year. They need to hit on a quarterback. Joe Shane, same thing. We heard during the offseason Hard Knocks last year, the efforts he made to try to trade up and try to acquire Jaden Daniels. It obviously didn't happen, but he really wanted a quarterback. Didn't get it last year. They put their money on, they banked on Daniel Jones staying, continuing to play at a high level. It didn't happen. And on top of that, they have now watched the player that they let leave, the face of their franchise, if you will, that had John Mara stressing over the idea that he'd be gone, Saquon Barkley, lead one of their rival teams in their division, the Philadelphia Eagles, to the Super Bowl with a chance to win it all in 2 weeks. And that can't sit well with John Mara. That can't sit well with the organization as a whole. Like, they have to figure this thing out and get this thing back on track and erase some of the, and rewrite some of those wrongs. Like, if Saquon Barkley wins the Super Bowl, I can't even imagine how much that organization is going to continue to get trolled this offseason. And so for them, finding that quarterback is of the utmost importance. Yes, it's important for the Browns. Yes, it's important for every team around the NFL to find a quarterback. I don't know if there's a team right now, though, this offseason that needs to hit on that position more than the New York Giants and make the splashy move that gets everybody reinvigorated, because right now it is just sad times for that organization. So that's team number one. If you're the Browns and you're not sold on these 2 quarterbacks, and the Giants are desperate for Shedeur Sanders, now, maybe they have to get up to 1 because maybe the Titans like Shedeur Sanders when this is all said and done. That'll, sort of reveal itself in the weeks ahead and months ahead. But maybe they have to get to 1 to get him, and so it's impossible. But maybe the Titans want Cam Ward, and then the Browns are like, well, we're not sold on these quarterbacks anyway. We don't feel like we need Shedeur Sanders. All right, then you trade back 1 spot. But when you do, you get a haul in return. I'm talking this year's first rounder from the Giants. I'm talking a first rounder next year. I'm talking about a bunch more of picks that potentially become available to you. Like the Browns can get a haul from the Giants just to move up 1 spot for the rights to Shedeur Sanders, because that organization is desperate, and I could see them operating from a place of desperation to try to land that guy. We're already hearing the links between the Giants and Dable, or the Giants and Shedeur. There was a video of Shedeur Sanders talking to Brian Dable and like dapping him up. We know Shedeur Sanders wore like the Giants colored cleats to in his bowl game, I think, towards the end of the college season. So there's like, where there's smoke, there's fire with that one. I think there's mutual interest. I think that the Giants are going to make a play to try to get Shedeur Sanders in New York. And so if you're the Browns and you have a chance to give them that opportunity, you can rob them cold to get whatever you want in terms of draft compensation for them to make that pick if they really, really want it that badly. The other team I look at is the Las Vegas Raiders, who are picking 6th. And it's a good spot for the Browns if they want to trade back. You move back 4 spots. You're still in the top 10. You're still drafting a top 10 player. there still is a number of names that could be available at that point that the Browns could draft and feel like could be a plug and play guy on a number of different areas in the on defense or offense. I don't know if Abdul Carter makes it that far, but maybe he'd be available. One of these tackles, whether it's Will Campbell, although he's projecting more as a guard, or Kelvin Banks Jr. Out of Texas, like one of those guys. I don't think Travis Hunter's going to drop that far, but it's going to be interesting to see. Like if somebody takes Travis Hunter and you don't really need Travis Hunter because it doesn't address a need for you right now, that's one less team or one less thing you got to worry about with the teams in front of you, or one less player you got to worry about with teams in front of you, and maybe make some other players the Browns have more interested available. So the Raiders are another interesting team that I think can be fleeced, if you will, because look at kind of like what they've been doing this offseason. They just hired Pete Carroll as their head coach, which felt very out of the box from a hiring standpoint for an organization that sounded like they were very much in on Ben Johnson from the Lions. They were in hot pursuit of him, and they didn't get any of the top guys. They didn't get Mike Vrabel because the links to Tom Brady there. He went back to New England. And so it seemed like Tom Brady, his influence over there is notable. He is running the show right now with the Raiders. And he's only got 5-10% ownership, but he is making his presence felt. And what they're doing this offseason, he hired one of his college buddies to be the team's GM in John Spytek, which nobody had really heard of or really know a ton about his background. Wonder why? Because it's a Tom Brady, yes man. So he's taking over as the GM. He makes the splashy coach hire once he misses out on all the top names in this year's sort of cycle. He's like, let's go get Pete Carroll, who's out there just kind of waiting in the wings as a sort of force into retirement. We want that guy. We want that name. So Pete Carroll's coming on, and the final straw sort of in this Tom Brady trying to make the Raiders relevant again feels like getting a quarterback. And so again, the same thing applies as to what I said with the Giants. If the Raiders want the pick and they're like, we need to get a quarterback this class, we need to make this happen. We really like Shedeur Sanders. Dion, I think, has talked about Vegas, or at least hinted at Vegas maybe being a place that's a fit for his son. So if they want to make that happen, fine. You can trade at the 2 with the Browns, but guess what? The Browns are going to, again, rob you blind and get as much as they can out of you in terms of draft compensation and trade back. And so those are the 2 teams I look at the most. And maybe there's some other ones in there, like maybe the Jets want a quarterback and that could happen. Maybe, the thing is, like, New England and Jacksonville, I think, aren't going to change their quarterback situations. New Orleans might want a quarterback, but I almost feel like that's too far back to trade. I don't know that they're going to get desperate with it. I think the 2 teams that are the most desperate that would actually give you like a major king's ransom of an asking price that you're looking for would be the Giants at 3 and the Raiders at 6. And those are the 2 teams that the Browns and Andrew Berry should be looking to, quote unquote, take advantage of if they're going to ultimately trade back out of the number 2 spot. And I still think that's very much in play, despite what the first segment we talked about, Shedeur saying was his number 1 attribute. That entices me. It makes me interested to see how they then go about evaluating him and if they like him enough. But I still think trading back becomes the most realistic possibility for this team. And those are the 2 teams I'm looking at to get the king's ransom of picks that you're looking for. Because again, if the Browns are going to do it, they got to know they get a first rounder next year at least. They got to stockpile picks that allow them to maybe get back up for a quarterback next year if they're not going to take one this year. Because if there's one thing we know about getting quarterbacks, the Browns learned the hard way. You can't cheat the system. You have to draft and develop one. And at some point, the Browns are going to have to do that. If it's next year, fine, but you need the draft capital to be able to get back up there, assuming you're not drafted in the top 2 again in 2026, which if you are, everybody's getting fired anyway. Speaking of needs for the Browns, there's one that I don't know we're talking about enough. I will reveal it to you coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown scored, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet, potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. So we've talked a lot about Browns' needs, and at some point I will probably do like a ranking or my list of the Browns' biggest needs. It feels like a good overarching topic to get into with the show. But one that I've been thinking about more and more is something maybe fans and I think in general people in the media are sleeping on is the tight end position. And it might not sound like I might be sounding like a little hyperbolic, or you might think like, what are you talking about, Spencer? David Njoku he was just a Pro Bowler last year. I still believe he's going to be a good tight end. Why are you not banking on David Njoku? Why are you thinking they need to maybe pivot off of him or start planning elsewhere? And there's a number of reasons for this, I think. And it starts with the fact that David Njoku is going into the the last year of his deal, because he has voided years after that. So he's on the last year of his deal. After that, he's going to be 30. This will be his age 29 season in 2025. And so after that, once he hits 30, if he's not back to that Pro Bowl level, are you really going to give him an extension? Are you really going to give him another contract and build bank on him being that top player still if he, doesn't put up the numbers that you're looking for? Now, again, I know he's an important value piece of this team as a blocker. I know he's adored by Cleveland fans. So this isn't me trying to run David Njoku out of town. I just don't know what how the Browns kind of view him into their longer term plans, especially as they start thinking about rookie or new quarterback, young guy that they're trying to develop. What is this, how does this offense kind of take shape and evolve into the next level or the next era of football? Is David Njoku part of those plans? I doubt it. I don't know, but I'm kind of doubting it. And the contract's part of it, but part of the reason I doubt the contract's coming or another contract is coming is because he took a step back this year, simply. And some of that was quarterback related. It's hard for anybody to establish any sort of footing when you have 4 different quarterbacks playing throughout the season. And so I understand that, and I want to cut him some slack for that. I also want to cut him some slack for the fact that he was injured out of the gate week 1 of the season with that ankle injury against the Cowboys. And I think that really did set him back for the rest of the season. Then he gets the knee injury late in the year. So it was an injury-plagued year all around for him, which just didn't help his cause. But he went from putting up Pro Bowl numbers, 882 receiving yards, the 6 touchdowns. He was brilliant with Joe Flacco. Year before that, he had at least taken some steady progress because he had 628 yards and 4 touchdowns on, 58 receptions, which was, those 2 seasons, he averaged over 10 yards per reception. And so the signs were there that he was finally turning the corner in his mid-20s. He was finally becoming the tight end that everybody thought he could be. And then he took a major step back this year. Again, injuries are part of the context there. But also, just in general, he looked slower. He looked like he had bulked up a lot more this year. And I don't know if that was by design. They wanted him to sort of be more bigger or get bigger and help him as a blocker. But he was already a great blocker before that. I maybe some of that was just related to the offense they were running with Deshaun Watson and trying to, get him as a pass protector, and then maybe also branching out to make some of the plays in the pass game. I don't know. I can't speak to what the motivations were behind getting him to look the way he looked, but he just did not look like the guy that was leaner, more athletic this year. And I think it showed in the way that he played when he was healthy and he was out there on the field. Now, maybe he was healthy, and I get he probably wasn't fully healthy all year, but there was just something missing in his game. And I don't know if maybe the quarterback situation just wore him down as well. And there was a mental part of this too. And that got to him. There are a number of things that could be in play. And I'm willing to, see how he bounces back next year, especially with a different quarterback under center and maybe a veteran that they can sort of rely on to run Kevin Stefanski's offense. And it seems like Njoku thrives in Kevin Stefanski's offense. Tight ends are also very important in Kevin Stefanski's offense. But that's another reason why I think this is an underrated need that people aren't talking about enough. It's not just about Njoku and his numbers. He can still, I think, be a part of this offense and thrive in it and be successful. But it's also the fact that Stefanski runs a lot more 12 personnel. He wants 2 tight ends out there. That's always been a calling card to what he wants to do. And so is it really going to be Njoku and Jordan Akins again? Like Akins is getting older. He's in his 30s. That's not a guy that you're like relying on all the time. So I think they have to start thinking about getting younger at that position as well. And thinking about like what the future looks like at it with that role, whether Njoku's around for another contract or not, which I'm doubtful of. But yeah, like the previously it was Harrison Bryant, right? Like he was a draft pick of the Browns, later rounds, that made a little bit of an impact and sort of, was part of the offense that he worked in a lot because of how much they used multiple tight end sets. They need somebody like that. I'm not saying that, you want maybe a higher round guy, ideally, to sort of give you a tight end for the future, but maybe they hit on a guy on day 3 or something like that. I'm not saying and I'm not saying tight end is such a priority that it trumps some of the other ones. Left tackle, running back, maybe a linebacker, defensive line. I'm not putting these in any particular order. I think those are all probably ahead. Well, again, we'll say that for another podcast to put them in a particular order. But I think those are all ahead of tight end. But I do think there's something to the idea that tight end needs to be a something that the Browns are at least thinking about and planning for moving forward. Because I don't know if he lost a step, but it sure didn't look like the same David Njoku that was a Pro Bowler the year before and was making promising steps the year before that towards being a Pro Bowler. And so I have some doubts there. I don't know if that's being talked about enough. We'll see how the Browns feel about it. I don't know that this is like an overly exceptional tight end class. Tyler Warren's one of the feature guys. The kid, and I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head right now, the kid from Bowling Green is another, highly graded tight end that people are really excited about at the next level. So there's some names, there's some guys out there. But I wonder if I think they should probably explore that a little bit this offseason. And maybe that comes in the form of just signing a guy in free agency too. I don't know. We sometimes forget, like we get all big, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed over the draft and the possibilities of finding new names and faces and new stars in the draft. And we forget that free agency comes first and they got to sign some guys. So maybe they address it there. But I do think it's an underrated need, the tight end position specifically, that people have not talked about quite enough to this point. And when we at some point do a ranking of the Browns' biggest needs, maybe at some point this week, I will make sure that tight end is on there because I do think it needs to be something that they address in some capacity this offseason. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team during the next week, this latest week of the offseason. There will be plenty more to talk about in the week ahead. So stay tuned, and I hope you continue to make us your first listen every single day. For your second listen, go find one of the Locked On NFL shows, or if you want to keep it local, you can check out Locked On Cavs, Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon. But for now, I appreciate you, Cleveland. Peace.